What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, November 9th, 2017. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. That's 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in with your comments and questions. And today in our third hour, we're going to have a guest, author David Joaquin. He's written a book, 9/11 in the World Today, which basically, I'm sure we can all agree, regardless of what you think actually happened on 9/11, there is absolutely no question it changed the course of our history, our society, our civilization, our war policy, certainly. And he's going to be joining us in hour number 3 to have a little bit of the discussion. And before we get into things here, for the people who are in BAM user, I'm going to turn around and stand up. Somebody actually sent me a T-shirt that says Aloha Snack Bar on it, which I thought was really kind of clever, and I'm wearing it here on the broadcast today. And hopefully you were able to see that on BAM User just now. So all kinds of fun stuff going on with that. All right, let's get into the serious stuff here. Everybody is still talking about what's going on with Donna Brazile. Apparently Donna Brazile woke up with a horse's head in her bed or something, because she's now trying to backtrack and say, well, no, that she never really said there was rigging of last year's primary, which is the exact opposite of what she was saying only a few days ago. And, of course, in the book itself, which she can't take back, you know, it's in there that the rigging took place. But apparently she has been threatened or bought or something, and she's trying to sort of pull back from that situation. But nobody's going to buy that. We understand that people who come out with the truth will get threatened, they will get attacked, and they will be somehow coerced to try and say, I was only kidding, it was just a joke. What will remain to be seen is if the book itself is ever actually released. Now, I've pre-ordered my copy. But we know that any kind of publication that's embarrassing to the narcocracy can, in fact, vanish. And I remember back when John F. Kennedy Jr. was assassinated, and there was an entire issue of Newsweek that had an article about him deciding to run for the Senate seat that Hillary Clinton eventually won, was literally recalled from the newsstands, taken off the trucks, and destroyed, and never replaced. So that's how much power the narcocracy has here. Now, we are hearing from Edward Klein that Hillary Clinton personally authorized her campaign chairman, John Podesta, to launch this controversial Donald Trump Russian dossier project. And this is, senior Clinton campaign strategist, worked for Hillary both 2008 and 2016. And Hillary apparently proved Podesta's decision to pay for the dossier by funneling campaign funds through Mark Elias, referring to the lawyer who represented the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee. Now, the dossier was delivered to the Clinton campaign by the opposition research firm Fusion GPS in the summer of 2016, and Hillary was delighted with it. Remember when the story first broke? That the DNC and Hillary had paid for the dossier, and Hillary said, "It's first I've heard of it." Nope. She was lying to us yet again. So, and, she really thought that was going to destroy Donald Trump, but she couldn't get anybody in the corporate media to run with it ahead of the election, because nobody could actually verify anything that was in it, which, as it turned out, it was all false anyway. So they leaked it out. Finally, I think it was BuzzFeed ran it, and then the corporate media said, well, okay, if it's up there, we can legitimately run this. And it was a big, huge stink. And it turned out to be a complete phony. And Hillary Clinton and the DNC paid $12 million for this. Now, as strange as it may seem, given that debacle, given that disaster, the Daily Mail is reporting that Hillary Clinton has gone back to Christopher Steele to obtain a second report with new salacious charges against Donald Trump. And talk about raising on your busted flesh here. how could Hillary or anybody close to her think that anyone is going to pay attention to a new dossier coming from the same source as the current discredited dossier? Remember the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome? We're there. Now, one of the things Donna Brazile has come on out with is that Barack Obama, when he was president, he was kind of a leech, but then show me any politician who isn't, and basically grabbing money off the Democratic Party for his own causes. And Donna Brazile is saying that's what left the Democratic Party in such poor financial shape that they were amenable to the deal they made with Hillary Clinton, where she was going to get them out of debt, put them on an allowance to keep them going, and then she was going to be calling all the shots. So it is a huge mess. It is worse than Watergate. And it's amazing how the corporate media is still trying to keep the lid on this. All right, we're going to do a shout-out now for our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. We're talking about Dossier Gate and Primary Gate and Uranium Gate and all of these. And one of the things that we have to be very careful of right now is that a lot of hoax stories are being planted on the independent media to try and harm our credibility. And one that got sent to me by a whole bunch of people is a good example. It turned out to be fake. The story was basically that Tony Podesta had been arrested over the weekend as part of Robert Mueller's investigation. And as near as we can tell, it's a completely phony story, but they're trying to put this stuff out there to make the independent media look reckless and careless. So we have to be very, very careful. Follow the usual rule, 2 separate sources have to have corroboration or it doesn't go up. A little bit of advice to my fellow travelers out here in the independent media. Now, Congressmen Gates, Biggs, and Gohmert have introduced a resolution to remove Robert Mueller, and basically citing his very obvious conflicts of interest and the fact that he never should have been appointed as special counsel anyway without a preliminary investigation. So the House of Representatives is looking like they're going to make a move on shutting down that whole special counsel that was just a hatchet job on Donald Trump. Then we need a new real special counsel to go after Uranium Gate, Primary Gate, Dossier Gate. Any one of these is a major scandal equal to Watergate, and we've got 3 of them, and who knows what's going to pop up in the future as more and more of this stuff goes public. Now, Trey Gowdy is investigating the uranium deal and apparently has now managed to speak to that undercover FBI informant, the one that they were trying to withhold. And finally, they got the permission, said there's no reason for you to withhold him from us. We need to talk to him. And so now that individual is providing information about the Uranium One deal. So that is moving forward. Now, we're still looking at what happened with William Binney and Mike Pompeo, where Donald Trump asked Pompeo to meet with William Binney about this idea that Russia hacked the DNC. And following the meeting, Mike Pompeo came on out and said he still believed it was Russia. Don't bother me with facts and techno jargon and the rest of that stuff. I believe it was Russia. And so William Binney has had several interviews since, including Russia Today, basically explaining the case why it had to be an internal leak and not a hack over the internet, and going back to that transfer speed of the data, where the information was copied onto a flash drive, and the time signatures show that it was basically 2 bursts totaling 87 seconds for 16 gigabytes of data. Now, if you know anything about the internet, you're not going to get 16 gigabytes of data in just 87 seconds. So it had to be done locally. And that's the only real evidence anybody has come up with about the leaking of these emails out into the wild, because nobody has found any evidence to support the claim that Russia hacked the DNC emails. It's just guilt by acclamation, or proclamation, if you will. So if the intelligence community had any factual information about Russian hacking, they would have produced it by now. They don't have anything. It's not there. So being at the very most generous, forgiving, and understanding, CIA Chief Mike Pompeo is a total idiot. And we should not have idiots running the CIA, or for that matter, any other parts of the government. But right now, it looks like Mike Pompeo is out there protecting the narcocracy, which, of course, is tangled up with the CIA itself. But at the very least, he's an idiot to ignore the hard facts. Now, apparently, back when the Hillary campaign and the DNC started claiming they'd been hacked, the FBI came on in and said, let us take a look. And according to Donna Brazil, it was Debbie Wasserman Schultz who blocked the FBI from access to the DNC server. So they couldn't do a forensic analysis. Same thing, NSA, same thing with CIA. The entire claim that Russia hacked the DNC servers came from CrowdStrike, and CrowdStrike eventually backed off that claim themselves when other security companies pointed out the serious flaws in their so-called chain of evidence. So there's nothing supporting the claim that Russia hacked the DNC server. The evidence, especially the timestamps on the data transfer, indicate an internal leak, and this gets us back to Seth Rich. And that needs to be looked into as well, especially with this idea that Donna Brazil said that following Seth Rich's murder, she was very concerned about her own life. And she was warned by an asset she had in the intelligence community that she had to take precautions, alarms, cameras, all of that stuff, battery backup on all of it. Now, if Seth Rich was, as the official story claims, a random robbery that was botched, and they shot him to death and did not take his wallet, did not take his cell phone, did not take his watch, then why would Donna Brazil feel her own life was in danger? So there's an issue there that must be gotten into. Now, do you remember Minnesota State Senator Don Schoen? And he was out there at the forefront of claiming Trump was a sexual predator. Remember, they had those 30 women come forward and say, oh, Donald Trump did this, Donald Trump did that, and all of them got shot down and discredited. Well, talk about those who live by the sword dying by the sword. Senator Dan Schoen is now himself accused of sexual assault by multiple women. So a little bit of comeuppance there. Now, getting on back to Rand Paul, the other day we had somebody call into the show here saying that the tackling, the beating was all about grass clippings. But apparently Rand Paul's neighbors have gone public saying that, no, this is fake news. There was something else going on. Had nothing to do with landscaping and grass clippings. Because Rand Paul apparently kept his lawn, within the homeowner association standards. So they're saying there's something else going on here. The grass clipping story is fake news. It's a cover-up. And I did say yesterday that this whole grass clippings tackling story smelled about as accurate as Harry Reid's accident with the exercise machine. So, getting on over to the war zones, Syria, I think you can say we're pretty much at the end of that. The government forces have liberated al-Bukamal from ISIS. That was their last stronghold. And what's left of ISIS and al-Qaeda, they're heading for the borders or anywhere else where they can get on out. So this is pretty much over. And the Syrian army was able to do this because Iraq allowed them to come into Iraq and go back into Syria across their border to basically envelop that last terror stronghold. And so now ISIS is basically nearing complete collapse, and it's over and done with. And inevitably, we are seeing calls from these nations, it's time for the U.S. to go home. Because the U.S. has been claiming for at least the last few years of the Syria campaign that they were there to get rid of ISIS and al-Qaeda as part of the war on terror. And so Syria is saying, ISIS and al-Qaeda are gone. You can go home now. Please take all your guns and bullets and ammunition and leave. And now Turkey is saying that it's time for the U.S. to withdraw their weapons and support for the U.S.-backed rebels, saying that they are a post-war threat to the region and even a threat to Israel. Nobody wants the U.S. over there anymore. Now, the U.S., again, is trying to rebrand the war in Syria. This ISIS and al-Qaeda thing didn't work out, so they've gone back to the earlier claim that Assad is gassing his own people, yada, 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 yada. Saddam has nukes, Assad has gas, the Lusitania wasn't smuggling weapons, all the lies we've been told to start these wars. And Russia is making the case to the UN Security Council, which is still divided on whether they want to vote for a new investigation. Basically saying that this OPCW UN investigation, the current one that they already have and they want to repeat, it's littered with systemic deficiencies, which is a very polite way of saying it's full of errors and mistakes. And Russia is reiterating that they think the April 4 incident was staged, which the indications are that it was, and it certainly wasn't the first time the U.S. has staged a gas or chemical attack to frame on somebody. The U.S. loves these false flag attacks. So does Israel, for that matter. Now, of course, war is good for the war business. Not really good for much of anything else here. But over in Great Britain, their war defense weapons contractors are having a field day there because apparently British arms sales to Saudi Arabia have jumped 500%. Because of what's going on in Yemen. And it tells us two things, that there is a lot of money being made on this. It tells us Saudi Arabia is having to spend a lot of money on the war in Yemen. And that in turn tells us that the war in Yemen isn't going as smoothly and quickly as everybody thought it was going to when Saudi Arabia first went in there. Now, as you know, Saudi Arabia is trying to claim that Iran has committed an act of war by supplying missiles to Yemen, which Yemen then fires into Saudi Arabia. Now, because Saudi Arabia has attacked and invaded and blockaded Yemen, it is reasonable that Yemen would fight back. But Saudi Arabia is trying to pivot this over to Iran. But it was pointed out only yesterday that the missile that was actually used for the strike near the Riyadh airport was a Yemeni-designed, Yemeni-built missile. Iran had nothing to do with it at all. And interestingly enough, the U.S. State Department spokeswoman Heather Nauert basically raised doubts that Iran provided missiles to Yemen, saying that Washington does not have full determination on who was responsible for that. So apparently they can't even prove that Iran sent any weapons into Yemen. Although Iran has as much right to send weapons to aid their friends as the U.S. has to send to, for example, Israel. That's how these games are played. Now, Saudi Arabia's foreign minister is calling for more sanctions on Iran for its support of terrorism and for violating the ballistic missile resolutions of the United States. So they're definitely ganging up on Iran. So it's getting very tense and very, very real. And how it's going to come about, we're not sure. My favorite theory is that Saudi Arabia is going to attack Lebanon and try and goad Iran into doing something overt that Saudi Arabia can then use to justify a direct attack on Iran. And it does look like Lebanon is going to get bombed very soon, because Saudi Arabia has now instructed all Saudi nationals to leave Lebanon immediately, was the word that they used. Kuwait is ordering their citizens to leave Lebanon, and they used the word immediately. And Bahrain issued a similar warning on Sunday. So apparently everybody knows what's coming. And Saudi Arabia could basically fly up along that border with Jordan and Israel and Syria, so it's not technically violating anybody's airspace, and it could bomb Lebanon, or it could fly out over the Mediterranean, turn back, and come in from the Mediterranean. But it will be a horrible, horrible slaughter, and I think their goal is to get Iran to come on in and just do something. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go to the telephones now. Steve in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Mike, about a week ago, I'm not sure who did it, and that's what I'm calling about, but one of our diplomats here, government appointees there, had mentioned that if they were asked to leave Iraq, that they would not. Do you recall that?
I remember that, yes.
Person who said that?
Yeah, and I think it was one of the military commanders, but basically said, yeah, we don't care if they want us to leave, we're going to stay. And it's arrogant in the extreme. And it is a reminder that the U.S. government right now is basically trying to garrison the entire world, the way the Roman Empire did.
Right, that's correct. I theorized long ago that they were never going to leave. As soon as they started to build that embassy, I knew they had no intention of ever leaving Iraq.
Yeah, absolutely. No question about that. And at some point, though, we might see the people of Iraq, like the people of Yemen, just decide we're going to take our country back. Because everybody now understands that since the end of World War II, this is how the U.S. has been building its empire. They'll go into a country very quietly. They'll stir up the opposition. They'll fund the opposition. They'll cause chaos and turmoil and basically leading to the downfall, the collapse of the government. And then they impose a puppet regime, a junta. And they've done it to all these different countries. They did it in Iran in 1953, Chile in 1973, tried to do it again in Iran in 2009, did it in Ukraine. They're doing it in all these countries. And now the people of the world understand that's what's been going on, that these revolutions within their borders aren't real, organic, internal revolutions. They are covert subversion and overthrow.
Right. Last but least, my connection out in Illinois, Rob in Chicago, actually, he sent me something from Dave Hodges. I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but he mentioned about National Guard in all 50 states being on alert. And didn't know if you knew more about that.
I have not heard anything about that at all, but, we have this strange story where there was somebody who called into Alex Jones' show saying there's going to be a false flag attack here in the U.S. to be blamed on Yemen and or Iran, and the story then goes that this caller was identified and later picked up by the FBI. And he didn't give out any classified information, but apparently the story is that they wanted to talk to him because he's trying to sound the warning of another false flag to start another series of wars.
Well, that's how they do it. Hey, thanks, Michael. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are open. Now, as you know, the U.S. and, for that matter, NATO are starting to ramp up in Afghanistan because things have not been going very well up there. And yes, they're getting the oil pipeline right away, and yes, the CIA is getting all the opium, but they're not able to stabilize the entire country. The Taliban are still giving them a lot of grief, and there is a reason why Afghanistan is called the graveyard of empires. The British found that out the hard way. The Soviet Union found that out the hard way. And I can imagine Putin's probably laughing his head off that the U.S. government walked into this known swamp thinking that things were somehow going to be different. But they're ramping up all of this, and the propaganda that is coming out of the corporate media is we have to go into Afghanistan because Russia is supporting the Taliban. They're giving them sophisticated weapons. It's Charlie Wilson's war in reverse, and we cannot allow them to prevail. But interestingly enough, the Afghani defense minister, Tariq Shah Bahrami, is telling reporters there is no evidence of Russia being in Afghanistan right now. It's basically the United States and its allies fighting against the Afghani people who do not want to live under foreign puppet rule. That's going to be a consistent common theme going into the future. The people of these various countries saying we do not want to live under foreign puppet rule. Afghanistan doesn't want to live under American rule. The Americans don't want to live under Israeli rule. That is the new common theme in geopolitics moving forward. So we're going to take another little break here for commercials, and when we come on back, more about the wars. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to take a phone call. Tom in Baltimore, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Rivero. Enjoy your show. I wanted to ask you a quick question before I jump into your topic of war. On your website, I see that you put a notation up there that you're under attack. I appreciate that. There's always a pop-up on my screen that says, will you allow pop-ups? We can't take you to the show until you click yes. Is that part of your program, or is that something I'm just being lured into? Because it seems to hang my computer up with ads every time I click on it.
No,
I find that I can avoid.
No, there shouldn't be any kind of a pop-up that says you have to click this to proceed to my show. I mean, there's the link that goes to BAM user. That shouldn't have.
Right.
Is that the one you're talking about?
No, sir. This is something that pops up at the bottom of the screen that says Internet Explorer has blocked pop-ups, and it won't allow me to actually click on the video feed until I click on that. However, I found that if I wait and click on the X, I can knock out that box, but it takes about a minute, so it seems like it's kind of like a trap. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't from your program.
No, it's not something that we've got in there, and unfortunately there are a lot of browser hijackers out there. I mean, right now the hacker cybercrime problem is epidemic. And unfortunately, we're doing the best that we can to try and keep this stuff under control. But if there are basically right now, there should be 3 pop unders and no pop overs on my website. And you're free to use an ad blocker, but the ad blocker should not interfere with your seeing the live video feed, which is from BAM user. So maybe BAM user is doing something different, and it's hard for me to check on that because the only time it's running is when I'm doing my show. But
I don't normally use that. I've done it in the past, and it sometimes will take me to a show that's not current. But when you say pop under, what is that exactly?
It means there'll be an advertising window that shows up behind the browser, not in front of it, so that when you close the browser, then you're presented with the ad. And I wish I could afford to run without ads. I really do. But it's unfortunately a necessity that in order to pay for all the hardware and the server time and all the rest of it, we have to have ads and we have to ask for donations, and that's just the way it is until some insane millionaire, leaves me about $5 million, and then I can tell my advertisers to go jump in a lake.
Of course you do, and I suspect, Mr. Rivero, with your popular message, that regardless of whether you knocked out all your ads or not, I think you would still be under attack.
Oh, no question about it.
At any rate, right. So Afghanistan, it amazes me how we and so many people. I'm retired now. I listen to C-SPAN, Washington Journal in the morning, and I listen to people calling the radio shows all day long. It amazes me how many people will stick up for this country and talk about how free they are and how they want to preserve things and they want the government to do this and they want the government to do that, when all along it's ever clear to me, and I considered myself, having worked in government for my entire career, that I was a little slow in the uptake, but I'm feeling pretty good about my uptake level because I see how many Americans are lulled into the stupor and the delusion that they're in a free country. Afghanistan, I think, may be more free than we are, actually. They're a loose coalition of various different factions, and that's why they're so hard to conquer. That's what we were supposed to be about. We were supposed to have these 50 sovereign states not under the control and the thumb of a central government, which could easily be taken over. And that's just what we have. We have this metastasizing, like a cancer government who is every day taking away more of our freedoms, fleecing the American public. And so many radio hosts, and I commend you for not being one of them, will talk about the same old issues, things that are on the surface that really don't matter, but they don't really get down to the core of the problem, like the IRS not being ever enacted by an act of Congress. They're a private corporation. The only government employee is the controller, and I'm going to get the name wrong, but it's not the IRS commissioner. There's a comptroller of internal revenue, something like that, who is a government employee, but what the IRS states, even on their website, as their authority to act, is not correct. If you follow the law, if you actually investigate, and you don't have to dig very deep, you'll find that there's no mention of an Internal Revenue Service. They are indeed a private corporation, not to mention the Department of Energy, the DEA. People, I cannot believe, are falling for the same old Reagan-esque nonsense about just say no to drugs. It's like the same old plays being played over and over again on the fool of the American average citizen, and people just don't realize. You know, how long do you think it'll be before the government tells you what you must put into your body?
Well, they're already doing that. They're already doing that with vaccines. They're mandating vaccines, and yeah, they're taking total control over our very bodies. And it is ridiculous and it is abusive. But I think more and more people are beginning to wake up and realize that virtually everything they've been told by the government and the corporate media has been a fraud, a lie, a deception of some kind to serve either corporate greed or national war policy. And I think more and more people are waking up to that. That's why the polls are showing trust in the U.S. government, in the Congress, and for that matter, Donald Trump, are at record lows. Trust in the corporate media is at record lows. And the audience numbers are showing people just are turning off those corporate TV news networks, and they're coming on over to the independent media to find out what's really going on. So I think those days when the government could tell a whopper of a lie and expect the majority of the American people to go along with it, those days are pretty much over. And the tragedy is that the planners of these things inside that central government don't seem to realize it yet, which is why they keep trying to do the same hoaxes over and over again, even though each new one is actually reinforcing the public image that, yes, the government plays dirty tricks on us to get us to do what they want.
And by the way, I'll leave you with this so other people can get on, but I just wanted to make this very clear. Like I said, I worked for an entire career in government. I spent 5 years, which I'm ashamed of, enforcing drug laws. The drug war is an absolute lie. It's a failure. It was born of a lie with Richard Nixon. Ehrlichman even admitted it. Nixon knew that blacks were against him, many of them, and that white hippies were against him. He couldn't outlaw being black or being a white trash hippie, in his words, so he decided to play the game that Trump is playing, say that he was concerned about the public health. He wasn't concerned about the public health. He was concerned about hippies and blacks, and he found a way to lock them up, and it's been a booming business for government. It's been a treachery on the American people. It's destroyed families. It's destroyed lives. And it's destroyed many of our liberties, and it's leading to an ever-increasing police state, which not only is affecting us here in America, but the DEA, I don't know if you know this, they're operating worldwide as a military force to control other governments through the drug laws. It's a big lie.
Well, I'll take it one step further than that. The war on drugs is actually the war on the competition's drugs, because we know that the biggest smuggler of illegal drugs into our country has been the Central Intelligence Agency. Heroin from Kunsa during Vietnam, cocaine during the Iran-Contra situation, and now we've got this Afghani opium flowing into the streets of America. When there is a drug bust, it's on somebody else who's trying to cut in on the government's action here. And
yes, sir.
And that's another reason why...
name an ill that America faces, be it gangs on the streets, be it crime, be it murder in our major cities, you name it, and it can all be traced back to the drug war. Even immigration and naturalization were being assigned to the DEA when they should have been keeping an eye on who was coming into this country. So you can even trace that back to the terrorist acts of 9/11 and the World Trade Center bombing back in '93. These things are all hooked together, and police are dying, children are dying, families are being destroyed. We're ever under the thumb of the government through these unconstitutional drug wars. Let's remember, it took a constitutional amendment for prohibition. What makes people think that this is just anathema to what freedom is all about? Before the Harrison Act in '33, people could consume what they want, and they should be able to consume what they want. When they commit crimes, when that happens, then it's a government issue. Prior to that, we're supposed to be a free people, but like I said, we're under the delusion that we're a free nation. We're not.
Well, here's what's going on here, and prohibition is the good model. Prior to prohibition, alcohol was very cheap, easy to get. Prohibition made it a very expensive commodity. And the vast sums of money that were collected by the bootleggers and the rum runners allowed them to literally reshape American politics in their own direction. And a lot of the major political families in our society rose to wealth and prominence during the age of the rum runners. Well, now we've had the same thing happen with the age of the drug runners, whereby making all these drugs illegal, they made them very expensive commodities, highly profitable to be trafficking in. And that's why they like to keep all this stuff illegal in order to maximize the profits. Anyway, Tom, I got to let you go. I've let you go on for a very long time, and we've got other callers waiting on the line. So let's switch over to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Dustin, are you there?
Mike, how you doing?
I'm doing fine.
Hi, Mike, how you doing? Hey, Mike, you said this before. Don't use Internet Explorer, Microsoft Edge, or Google Chrome. Use Yandex, Yandex. And the search engine should be DuckDuckGo. No problems with what really happened. Microsoft Edge and Internet Explorer and Google Chrome will all give you some crazy pop-ups all over the screen. Don't use those. Use Yandex.
Okay, well, that's good advice here, and more and more the browsers themselves are being turned into ad presentation engines, and I understand that Edge is so bad they were trying to do a presentation at one of the Microsoft things, and the presenter just said, hang on a second, and he had to install Chrome to be able to get this thing to work properly. We've really allowed this technology to become too complicated to properly maintain, and we need to start thinking about going back and simplifying so that it's easier to create applications and tools, easier to repair them and maintain them, and more difficult for the cyber criminals to find a way through them.
Hey, Mike, I want to switch gears to Saudi Arabia. If you read that story about the billionaires sending a lot of money out of the country, so a lot of them are getting ready to skedaddle, or maybe they're afraid Saudi Arabia is going to get pounded by the Iranians.
Well, it's kind of, I think any time a war is rearing its head, you're going to see the billionaires are going to try and get their money off to someplace out of bombing range. But it may be in response that this purge doesn't appear to be over yet, and it does appear to be motivated, at least in part, by the fact that under Saudi law, if somebody is convicted of these crimes of corruption, their wealth can be confiscated by the Saudi government. And we're talking billions and billions of dollars in assets. So that may be a reason they're trying to move their money out of the country.
Mike, the Iranians would crush Saudi Arabia. They can't even win in Yemen. Most of their army is like you said, this for mercenaries, and a lot of them are Yemeni people, where they brought in, from their side per se. But they're not good fighters, except for the other sect of the of the Houthis. They're like warrior. They're a warrior caste, like Afghanistan. So I mean, the Iranian. The only way Saudi Arabia would be able to, if the U.S. got involved, and as far as Lebanon's concerned, hey, Putin, sell them some S-400s real quick.
Yeah, that would be the smartest thing for Lebanon to do right now. But you see, the whole point is, as you pointed out, it won't just be Saudi Arabia going to war on Iran. Saudi Arabia is being used as the proxy to open the door to the war on Iran that is desired by Israel and the United States. And so definitely the United States
Russia won't allow them to attack Iran, Mike. Just like they wouldn't let the Syria to fall. Iran is an economic partner, and they sign a lot of deals, and they're not going to let Iran fall, Mike.
Well,
so you're looking at another World War III scenario.
Well, I think we're already in World War III. We just haven't had the really big bang yet to make it obvious to everybody. But I'm convinced in future history books they're going to look back and say that, yes, here in 2017 we were already in the early stages of World War III. We're there. We've got too many wars going on in too many different places, and now we're getting all this talk about going into Iran and Lebanon could easily bring the United States and Russia into direct conflict. We already know that NATO is up there in Europe, getting Europe ready to go to war against Russia. So obviously everybody is thinking this is going to happen somewhere down the road, and that's when the nukes are going to start flying.
It's an economic world war right now. This is all about economics if people don't realize.
All wars are
all
economic.
About hegemony. Yeah, exactly. And, things are changing, though. I mean, China's still the 600-pound gorilla, as they say, or 500-pound gorilla. If they get, attack on Iran's attack on Russia and attack on Russia's attack on China, I mean, plus Turkey, I mean, you're dealing with some countries that, I'll tell you, Mike, I think a lot of Americans' allies will probably stay at home for this one.
They might just. Certainly the people of Europe don't want to get into another world war because portions of the last two were fought on their territory, and you can still see the scars. And I don't think they want to be part of a new World War III. And to be very honest, when we're hearing about the command and control structure being corrupted, like with this Fat Leonard scandal, when you were looking at these very expensive, poorly performing weapons coming out of the military-industrial complex, I do not think the United States can win a war against Russia and China, even if it does go nuclear.
And Mike, real quick, I just want to switch over. I don't know if you talked about this yesterday or the day before about Germany's court saying they're going to add a third gender. It's crazy.
It is crazy. It is absolute nonsense, and I think this whole political correctness thing has just gone too far. We're becoming decadent, just the entire society. Anyway, Dustin, I need to let you go. We got to do a break for commercials. We'll be back with another phone call and more news after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to take another phone call, then get back to the news here. Al in Canada. Aloha, Al. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I hope you're doing well. The fellow that called before Dustin called in, or you were talking to Dustin, that guy's first mistake was he was using Internet Explorer. I haven't used it in so long I even forgot about it, but like this multi-core threading that search engines can do now is just, kind of left Internet Explorer in the dust because they offer it with the operating system, right?
Yes.
You go out and get it, So anyway, but it is actually not too bad if you know how to optimize it a little bit. But and then that guy was wow, he really hit the nail on the head with a lot of the things he was saying. And the thing that struck me the most was something you said a long time ago. I remember the first time you said it. It was something like the last official act of the government is to loot the nation. Everyone in your government is filthy rich, and apparently everyone in the government in Canada is filthy rich too when they're in there long enough.
Yes.
And they hide their money in offshore tax havens.
Yeah.
Those dirty buggers.
Yes.
What have they been doing while we've been looking the other way, trying to take care of ourselves?
They're doing the same thing. They're taking care of themselves at the expense of everybody else. And, we're still looking to see what else is going to come out of those Paradise Papers. But the reality is, to the ultra-rich, taxes should be paid by, the lower classes. That's your only reason to exist, is to work and breed new soldiers and new workers and to pay the cost for everything while, they gather their treasures around themselves and have a lot of parties.
Well, a lot of these parties and party situations are coming to light now, aren't they?
Yeah,
these people
they are.
Actually think they can do whatever they want.
Well, up until recently, they've been able to get away with it.
That's the law.
Yeah, if you got enough money, you can literally get away with murder. And it is amazing. And I think it's good that ordinary people are starting to realize that the lifestyles of the rich and undeserving are really kind of slimy when you get right down to it.
Was this going to happen nonetheless, whether or not Hillary won or lost?
I think all of this is an artifact of the rise of the independent media, because the corporate media, for the most part, has been brought to heel by the money junkies.
Well, they defecated on themselves.
Yes. But I think just the independent media, we're not hired by anybody. We're not being paid by anybody. We're going to report the stories that come on out. And we're going to report things that are going to make people in positions of wealth and power very embarrassed about some of their behavior. As well, we should, because they like to call themselves our leaders, but they have to lead by example. Al, got to let you go. We got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. And getting on back to Syria, Russia has now issued a warning following the United States flying some of their aircraft just a little bit too close to the Russian bases in Syria. And you need to understand that Russia is in Syria at the request of the Syrian government. They're supposed to be there. And the U.S. is flying surveillance aircraft, spy aircraft, and in one case a bomber right up to the edge of these Russian bases. And Russia is saying, you shouldn't be doing that. And there's an implied threat there. And this is all against the background of everybody in the region saying, ISIS and al-Qaeda are gone. It's time for the U.S. to leave Syria. And, of course, the U.S. is trying to revive that whole Assad gassed his own people, therefore we have a right to go after him. And that's not really getting anywhere. The UN Security Council is very much split on this idea of calling for yet another investigation into this. I think many of these countries are in agreement with Russia, and so am I. It was a staged event. Because it never made any sense that Assad was going to gas his own people. The one thing that would allow the U.S. to just scream about, oh, we got to go back into Syria. Assad is many things. He's not stupid. He's not reckless. He's very, very careful. And again, as Russia and Syria have chased ISIS and al-Qaeda out of Syria, every time they find one of their abandoned bases, they're finding either chemical weapons or the materials with which to make chemical weapons. So we know where the chemical weapons were coming from. Now, here's an interesting little story. Britain has formed a special battalion of 600 commandos for quick interventions in the Western Balkans. And basically, they're spending $4.6 billion on, and they're calling it the confrontation with Russia in Europe. So, again, they're talking about, we're going to go to war with Russia because Russia's being the aggressor. That's like saying the iceberg attacked the Titanic. Now, Russian lawmakers, on the other hand, are basically blasting the U.S. decision to supply $300 million worth of lethal weapons to Ukraine, saying that this is a threat to Europe. It's a threat to the security of all of Europe. It's certainly a blow to the Minsk Accords. But again, it is very obvious, judging by actions and not by words, that the end of this war agenda will be a war with Russia and China. And I don't think we can win that. Now, down in the Middle East, it looks at this point like there's going to be a regional war reaching from the Mediterranean all the way across to Iran. And it's going to be Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Syria, probably the U.S. and Israel will all be involved. And we know that Russia is likely to come in on the side of Iran. And that could basically be the start of World War III for real. We could be in World War III for real by Christmas time. Because it's obvious the attack on Lebanon is imminent. Might even happen this weekend. That's how serious this is. And people need to be paying attention to what's going on. If things go badly, we're looking at a major regional war that will bring us into direct confrontation with Russia. Now, apparently, over in Saudi Arabia, they're still playing this game. A lot of people are trying to figure out exactly what happened with Lebanese Prime Minister Hariri, because he was summoned to Riyadh by his Saudi backers, and while there, just all of a sudden announced he was resigning out of fears of an assassination plot against him, similar to the one that had taken the life of his father. And at the same time all of this is going down, Saudi Arabia accuses Iran of deadly military aggression and accused Lebanon of declaring war on Riyadh by allowing Hezbollah aggression against the kingdom. Now, so far, Hezbollah doesn't seem to have actually done anything against Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the aggressor down in Yemen. But all of this is happening in just a few days. So something has been put into action. Some plan, some agenda is moving forward here. Now, as I mentioned on that phone call earlier in the show, last hour, a former military and intelligence operative who's called into the Alex Jones show on many occasions is reported to have been picked up by the FBI after he issued a public warning that the United States was about to fall victim to a false flag terror attack. Now, the caller, identified only as Zach, warned yesterday that the Saudi civil war was about to spill over into terror attacks within the United States that would be blamed on Yemeni nationals, but actually carried out by the CIA. And yeah, we know that when the American people are not enthusiastic about a war, we're going to get a false flag terror attack. It almost seems inevitable at this point. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our nation. With regard to Iran, article that came on out of Land Destroyer, basically saying the same thing that we were saying. America's withdrawal from the Iran deal doesn't prove that Iran is a threat to world peace. It proves that the American government cannot be trusted. And that is the real damage there, especially when you're talking about forming a coalition for a world war, and you're out there and people know they can't trust any promises the American government is making. That may prove to be the deciding factor for many nations when they choose whether they're going to be on the American side or the Russian side of the coming conflagration. So, in the name of stopping Russian aggression, 24 upgraded Apache helicopters have been sent to Germany as part of Operation Atlantic Resolve, the mission to deter Russian aggression against Europe. Russia hasn't aggressed against Europe. If anything, Europe is pushing closer and closer to Russia, trying to get some of those nations into the EU. Now, the British Royal Air Force is deploying 4 Eurofighter Typhoon jets to Romania to deter an increasingly assertive Russia. Do they really think anybody is buying this nonsense that Russia is the aggressor, that Russia is the instigator? Look over the last 16 years of war, and you find out what nation is doing all the invading, the bombing, the drone strikes, the coup d'etats. It's not Russia. It's not Iran. It's the United States. The United States is the aggressor. I hate to be the one to share this with you, but we're the bad guys this time out. NATO is intensifying its preparations for war with Russia. They're building the command and logistical infrastructure to enable it to quickly move thousands upon thousands of troops to Russia's borders. So, again, who's the aggressor? Who's initiating war preparations? I mean, if you're my age, you lived through all of this back in the 50s. You know, the Soviets are coming for us. The Soviets are aggressor. We've got to do this. We've got to take all your money and spending it on war because the commies are coming to get you. Never happened, by the way. Now, Moscow is asking the United States to prove that this program by the Pentagon, which is collecting genetic material from Russian citizens inside Russia's territory, that came on out a couple of weeks ago, and they're raising a concern that this might be related to biological weapons research in a field of ethnically selective biological weapons that only work against certain gene types. And so Russia is now asking the U.S. to prove that this research they're doing is for a benign purpose. Now, a lot of the existing chemical weapons work by attacking the interface between muscle tissue and nerve tissue, causing paralysis. Curare is a natural poison that does exactly this. But if somebody could have a poison gas like this where it only goes to work if it detects a certain gene, then you have a biological weapon that's only going to kill one type of people on the battlefield and leave everybody else alive. That would be a tremendously powerful biological weapon. Because today, if you use a chemical or a biological weapon, you've got to get your own people out of the way. Now, there's been a study that has come on out saying that Washington has spent $5.6 trillion on all these wars since 9/11, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and Pakistan. And apparently they're not including all the that's going down in Somalia and all across Africa. So even that number may be low. But the research from the Watson Institute of International and Public Affairs at Brown University found that as of late September, the U.S. wars combined with additional spending on Homeland Security and the Departments of Defense and Veterans Affairs had totaled more than $4.3 trillion since the 9/11 attacks, and that number surged to $5.6 trillion once likely costs were added for fiscal year 2018. Now, this comes down to, drum roll please, $23,386 per individual American taxpayer is what all of this is costing. And I still think that number is low because this Watson Center apparently did not pick up on some of the areas in which the U.S. is involved, like Yemen. Yes, the Saudis are doing the actual work, but the United States is paying for it. And for some reason, the U.S. military is now joining the Brazilian army in exercises in the Amazon. So they're going in there, and it's a sign of closer U.S.-Brazil defense ties. Are they going to try and get Brazil to take part in the war against Venezuela? It is turning into a world war right before our very eyes. Now, Donald Trump, of course, is still on his Asia tour, and apparently his speech regarding North Korea was about as hawkish as you could get. According to this story that we're seeing over in Global Research up in Canada, basically speaking from Seoul, South Korea, Trump delivers an ultimatum to North Korea: complete unconditional surrender to U.S. dictates or total war. There's no halfway ground. There's no diplomacy. That's the new U.S. foreign policy. Do what we tell you without question, or we will bomb you. Is Trump simply blustering and bluffing? Because the U.S. is certainly not capable of total war against every other country on planet Earth. Meanwhile, do you remember about 2 years ago, there was this very fascinating video, it was all over YouTube, where somebody had shot this contrail, if you will, at very high altitude over China. And it was after dark, so the contrail just stood out very brightly. It was still in sunlight up at that altitude. And it appeared to be a transatmospheric vehicle because at one point in the flight, the contrail was fanning out in straight lines, meaning there was no air there to slow the flow of the exhaust plume. And speculation was that China had succeeded in producing hypersonic vehicles. And so now today, had a story over at Free Beacon where China has disclosed the first images of their hypersonic strike aircraft that are being developed to deliver nuclear weapons. And they're saying that basically these hypersonic aircraft can get right through any U.S. missile defenses. They are that fast. Now, for a long time, I've been talking about my prognostication, if you will, that the U.S. government is headed toward a collapse along the lines of the Soviet Union. Some people agree with me. A lot of people don't. A lot of people screaming, let's have a revolution now, which I disagree with. But apparently I'm not the only person thinking along that way, because over in Russia Insider, they had an article. The USA is cracking up just like the USSR did. In fact, they are related. And it basically goes on to say that the Soviet Union was destroyed because much of their ideology was idiotic. And it goes on to say that American ideology is just as messed up. And that's why it's all going to fall apart. Personally, I think it's because of that Ponzi scheme central bank, which has run up so much debt, the economy is locking up. Along with all the stories about corruption, vote rigging, everything that's coming on out, the American people are simply not trusting of their government. The vast majority of the American people are not going to be willing to follow this government into a world war, certainly not to send their children. I think most people would probably agree with me. Anybody who wants a war with Russia, let's give them a parachute, send them over there. Now let's talk about the economic news here a little bit. As you know, there is a pension crisis all over the country, both public and private, that goes all the way back to that 2008 mortgage-backed security fraud meltdown. And prior to that meltdown, those mortgage bundles were given AAA ratings by Wall Street's pet rating agencies. And by law, pension funds are only allowed to invest in AAA-rated securities, because pension funds represent elderly people who don't have the luxury of having enough time to start over and rebuild their lives. And so these mortgage bundles were rated AAA. The pension funds bought into them. The mortgage fraud fell apart, and the pensions were defunded. And nobody really has the courage to stand up and say, this is all the fault of Wall Street, and Wall Street should clean up this mess. But according to this article out of Zero Hedge, they're basically saying that the pensions are in trouble, the public pension system is in trouble, and ultimately what's going to happen is the taxpayers are going to be asked to bail it out. We were talking yesterday about this big stink down on the island of Maui here, where their property taxes went way up, and they were told it's so we can give you better services, and then they found out the money was actually going to prop up Hawaii's state employee pension plan. So basically, Wall Street stole a bunch of money with the mortgage-backed security fraud, wrecked the pensions in the process, and ordinary taxpayers are expected to cover that loss. That is what fascism is like, where those who make money get to keep it, and those that lose money transfer those losses onto the ordinary people. That's fascism. Now, as you know, there's a lot of concern about oil prices, especially as it looks like Saudi Arabia is going to go to war against somebody, and that'll probably drive the prices up. There have been recent increases lately because Saudi Arabia has been claiming that they're cutting back on production to try and artificially create a shortage to drive prices up. But in this article out of Zero Hedge again, apparently people have been looking at the Saudis' oil reserve storage, which consists of these tanks which have floating roofs, so you can see how much oil is actually in them. And satellite images are revealing that Saudi Arabia has been sort of fibbing a little bit about having less and less oil, that they are, in fact, they have as much as they ever did in storage. Meanwhile, the European Union is approving sanctions on Venezuela, supposedly over an ongoing crackdown on the opposition. And I note that the EU is not putting sanctions on Spain for their crackdown on Catalonia. So again, a little bit of hypocrisy there. Okay, we're coming up here on another commercial break. And when we come on back, we're going to be talking about some fun stuff here. Bizarre, politically correct nonsense. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And as you know, following that horrible shooting down in the Texas church, which, by the way, they're calling it the worst church massacre in U.S. history. That's not true. Waco was a lot worse. But everybody's reacting to it differently, where people say, oh, we've got to ban all the guns, ban all the guns. Well, what about the guy with the AR-15 who confronted the shooter? Well, he doesn't count. If we banned guns, the shooter wouldn't have had a gun. Of course he would. All a gun ban does is disarm the law-abiding citizen. Criminals can get guns. You can make guns these days easily. It's trivial almost. So a lot of people are talking about, armed security at the churches, or allowing, the pastors, allowing people to have guns. And apparently up in Michigan, they're considering a bill that would put guns in schools and churches to try and discourage this kind of thing going over. Now, USA Today was out there pushing the gun grabber agenda and say, we've got to get rid of these assault weapons. It's not just the assault weapons, it's the things you can put on them. And they had this illustration showing an AR-15 rifle with, believe it or not, a chainsaw bayonet attached to that front block. And, of course, it has blown up in their faces because it's a ridiculous idea. It's an urban legend at best. And people were basically coming on in there with their own variations on the USA Today's gaffe, including a lightsaber bayonet on the front of the AR-15. And my favorite was the Velociraptor ejector, where you'd hit the trigger and it would fling a Velociraptor onto your helpless victims. And it's rather interesting because the gun grabbers themselves really don't know that much about guns and gun culture. They do make these goofs every once in a while. But always remember, the largest church massacre in U.S. history was at Waco, Texas, courtesy of the United States government. 82 men, women, and children. And it started with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms needing a publicity stunt because they were facing serious criticism from Congress over several botched raids where they kicked down the wrong door. They'd actually killed innocent people. And so the BATF said, we need a big score. We need to prove that, the country needs us. Well, what about that church group over there that pay for their church by buying, repairing, and reselling guns? That's it. They got to have illegal weapons there. Let's go on over. That's how it all started. And they invited the reporters to go along with them. It was going to be a photo op. And one of the reporters knew David Koresh and called him and said, do you know there's a BATF raid coming to your church? And Koresh said, it's okay, and we don't have anything to hide. So the BATF shows up. Koresh opens the front door. He's promptly shot in the groin. And it went downhill from there. And when it was all over and they had gassed all these people to death with a poison gas that's illegal to use on enemy troops in time of war, and then sparked a fire that burned the place to the ground, they found that all the guns the Branch Davidians had inside that church were still in the gun room because they didn't work. They were still being repaired. All the working guns were actually out at a gun show that day. Now then, let's talk about the TSA, probably the second most hated agency in the U.S. government. Apparently, Department of Homeland Security has done another round of screenings and tests and came on out and said that the equipment and procedures failed more than half the time, according to a person familiar with the classified report. Well, somebody's leaked the classified report, and apparently to the U.S. government, more than half the time means 80%. The TSA failed to stop these attempted getting weapons on the plane, getting past the security, 80% of the time. It's an epic fail. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And it looks like the spoiled brats are really pounding on my server today, which we sort of expect them to do during the shows here. I'm looking at the Fox News feed here, and apparently there's another allegation that some politician chased some girls, and the politician's denying it, saying it's a political attack. This is unfortunately, sadly, turning into a witch hunt, which means a lot of innocent people are going to get harmed. And as I said, when this first started cranking up about Harvey Weinstein, yes, some of the accusations and allegations are going to be true. Some are going to be false. Some are going to be hoaxes and frauds by people who just want to get a little free publicity, get their name in the newspapers, try and get their careers kicked off, or maybe even try and get some hush money, as it were. So we have to take each case on a case-by-case basis here. Now, then, as you know, everyone's talking about terror this, terror that. The road rage incident in New York on the pedestrian walkways being called an act of terror. Not much real support for that. But they're pushing that whole terror idea, and that sort of dovetails with this claim that there's going to be another major false flag terror attack to try and get us all hot and bothered to support a new war all across the entire Mideast. But there's something you ought to keep in mind. Okay? Very few people are actually harmed or killed by terrorism. And I'm not meaning to trivialize or minimize the suffering of those that are. And we're obviously including the victims of false flag terror as well. But the reality is right now, you as an average American, you are 35,000 times more likely to die from heart disease than a terror attack. You are 33,000, almost 34,000 times more likely to die from cancer than from a terrorist attack. You are far more likely to be killed by your doctor making a mistake than by an act of terror. But we don't see warnings about be careful about doctors. They're deadly. They kill people. And yeah, they do, quite a few. Now, over in San Francisco, at the San Francisco State University, the Israel lobby filed a lawsuit against the university and against Professor Rabab Abdullah Hadi, basically charging that they were creating a hostile environment for Jewish students based on advocacy for Palestine and criticism of Israel's policies. And the federal judge threw the case out of court and said it's a frivolous lawsuit. And that, of course, is a major victory for U.S. academics and students who are facing this lawfare, this legal assault from pro-Israel groups that are trying to punish and censor criticism of the actions of the government of Israel. Now, I keep looking through that Bill of Rights, and I keep seeing that thing about the right to freedom of speech. I don't see anything in the Bill of Rights about a right not to have to deal with a hostile environment. It's just not in there. And so, yeah, the judge was right to throw that out. This idea, oh, you're creating a hostile environment. Okay, buy a helmet. The world is one big hostile environment. Only liberals think that it can be turned into this marshmallow padded wall utopia. Now, this one is just a little weird, and this is coming out of Fox News and Todd Starnes, and basically what they're saying is over in Delaware, they're considering a law to let students decide what race and gender they are without the parents' permission. They're actually debating this regulation that would allow students to choose their race and their gender. And everybody would have to go along with that. You know, I'm a black woman. Okay, fine, you're a black woman. And it's absurd. We're descending into a world of make-believe, courtesy of the liberals. I mean, never mind what you were born with. You can make believe that you're something else. And we, out of our respect and love for you, will just go along with that. Well, I self-identify as a very rich talk show radio host. So I'm still wondering why they're not sending in all the money, the millions of dollars. I mean, that's how silly it's getting. And here's another one to show you just how weird this is getting. As you know, all these Confederate statues are being torn down. They're being replaced with things like, the statue of a pregnant black mother in one case. And in Washington, D.C., They're going to replace one of those Confederate statues with an 8-foot-tall statue to former Washington, D.C. Mayor Marion Barry Jr. And if you don't remember, Marion Barry Jr. was the Washington, D.C. mayor caught on video smoking crack cocaine. So that is now supposed to represent an icon of American culture. A crackhead mayor is now going to have a statue in Washington, D.C. Oh, look at the statue. Don't you want to grow up to be like this person? Hell yeah. It's amazing. All right, let's talk about some stuff that's going on in the world of computers as we head on up to the top of the hour and our guest here. Netflix has issued a warning. There is an email campaign targeting millions of their subscribers saying their Netflix membership has been suspended. You have to click this link to reactivate it. It is a scam. They're trying to steal your credit card details. And Netflix says they never go out to their subscribers. The subscribers have to come to the website to do whatever they're doing. But if you get, and Netflix says the problem is these emails look very convincing. They've copied off and stolen all the logo images and graphics, and it does look legit. But Netflix is saying it is a scam to get your credit card details. I mean, we're living in an age of scams. Have you noticed how totally out of control it is? I mean, how many scam emails you get every day in your mailbox, how many phone calls you're getting from scammers. It's like it's open season on American people. And the government can't be bothered dealing with this kind of fraud and everything because they're out there giving the Russians what for. Now, we're all talking about self-driving vehicles, and a lot of progress has been made. But apparently they had a little bit of an embarrassment in Las Vegas yesterday because they unveiled their first self-driving bus. And it's the first self-driving shuttle pilot project geared toward the public, and they had an unveiling. And in less than 2 hours after the unveiling, the self-driving bus crashed into a semi-tractor-trailer truck. It would be nice if people would actually test these things before they just throw them on out in the marketplace. Now, this raises an interesting question. Okay, if your driverless car got hacked and crashed, like may have been the case with Michael Hastings, would your insurance company pay? They're out there looking for some guidelines. You know, what happens if the driverless car is hacked or if the driverless car just has a software error? Who's going to pay for it? So, now, WikiLeaks has started with the new release from Vault 8 of CIA hacking tools. And one of the ones they put on out there, and they're putting out the source code, which means the cyber criminals are now going to have access to all this stuff. And they put out one for a system called Hive, which is apparently a covert communications platform for a whole range of CIA malware. And apparently it allows agency-operated malware to mask itself under fake certificates and impersonate public companies. And apparently they found indications that the CIA was using Hive to impersonate Russian cybersecurity firm Kaspersky Labs. They want Kaspersky to go away because Kaspersky won't play ball with them. Kaspersky won't put in a back door for them. And even worse, Kaspersky has outed the Equation Group as actually being part of the NSA. So bad Kaspersky. If you're a loyal American, you'll get an American security product for your computer that allows the CIA and the FBI to just come on and go as they choose. That's what loyal Americans will do. And apparently there's now a problem with unpatched printers from the Brother Corporation, where apparently hackers can crash your unpatched printers with a malformed HTTP post request. And they can basically, apparently there's a vulnerability in the web front end of Brother printers that will allow an attacker to launch a denial of service attack. And in response, the web server is rendered inaccessible and all printing will cease to function. And the vulnerability appears to affect all Brother printers with the debut web front end. So it is a major problem out there. Now, here's a good one. And I've heard these stories before, but they're always later revealed to be an urban legend. This one appears to be real. And it involves the Mantis Tech GK2 mechanical gaming keyboard. It costs around 50 euros. And apparently it's been discovered that it does have a built-in keylogger that sends data to China. It records everything you type on the keyboard and sends it to a server maintained by the Alibaba Group. Now, given that it's a gaming keyboard, I imagine that the vast majority of what they're getting is going to be gaming commands. But if you are signed on to a networked gaming system, they're going to be able to get your passwords and your logins and get into the account. I mean, that's a scary thing when you go to the store and you buy hardware and it's rigged against you, whether it's this keyboard or your iPhone or your tablet or your desktop, and it's basically been hacked against you. Open doors for the FBI and the CIA and the cyber criminals. It is an epidemic problem. It's out of control here. Now, I can imagine that this next idea sounded really good at the board meeting where they came up with it. But I don't think this is going to work, and I'm sure you will probably agree with me. Facebook is now asking their users to send Facebook their nude photos, supposedly to tackle revenge porn. And Facebook is saying they're going to take all your naked, sexy photos that you send them of your own free will, and they will create a digital signature from them. They promise they're not going to keep the photos themselves, but they're going to convert the images into a unique digital fingerprint, which will be used to identify and block any attempts to re-upload that same image. Well, I don't think this is going to get a huge response because I don't think anybody's going to want anybody at Facebook looking at those pictures in the first place. They're not going to trust Facebook to delete them in the second. And third, the people who are planning to do revenge porn, all they have to do is run a little bit of image processing on the picture and it'll evade that digital fingerprint. Oh, they could put a border around it, big thick border around it. So that's lame. That's a lame idea. I think it really is. So let's talk a little bit about vaccines. And apparently, the Scripps Institute and the University of Pennsylvania has basically come on out with a new explanation for why the flu vaccines have been so ineffective. And they are admitting it's been ineffective. They're still telling you, get it every year. You got to get your flu vaccine because it's a big moneymaker. But they're talking about, in this article, about the structural explanation for the low effectiveness of the seasonal influenza H3N2 vaccine. They're admitting it's low effectiveness. And here is what they found. They normally will use chicken eggs for culturing clinical isolates and large-scale production of vaccines. What they found is that when the influenza virus is put into the eggs, the chicken eggs, they will mutate and adapt to being inside chicken eggs, which influences antigenicity and the vaccine effectiveness. In other words, in simple language, the virus in the vaccine mutates in the chicken eggs, and therefore the patient's immune system is responding to the wrong version of the flu virus because of the way it's being manufactured. The flu vaccine you're getting is different than the flu that's out there that you're supposed to be vaccinated against. There it is. But you go down to the pharmacy, you'll still see the sign, get your flu vaccine here. Money, 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 money. Now, there's another story. This is out of vaccineimpact.com, and it's about Dr. Cammie Benton, who, being a doctor, fell for the vaccine orthodoxy until her own children exhibited symptoms of vaccine damage. And so she's basically gone back to asking about what's the science behind the flu shot. And she asked a senior CDC official about it, but she's found no credible studies backing up the science behind the flu shot. It's snake oil. It's snake oil. It's a big money maker, but it's snake oil. So here we have these vaccines are not effective against the flu you're being vaccinated against, but because of the adjuvants, they are still causing harm to kids, especially when they're mixed together. I mean, it's just absurd nonsense. It's just very, very reckless. And by the way, if you haven't seen the documentary Vaxxed yet, you need to. We live in a society in which obtaining more money is the top priority, even at the expense of the public health and well-being. And that is another sign of fascism. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And there's been an interesting development here, and this goes back to the dossier. Apparently, when Donald Trump was in Moscow in 2013, which was part of the Miss Universe pageant, according to one of his bodyguards, somebody did try and send 5 women to Donald Trump's room, uninvited, and they were, of course, rejected. But it looks like maybe even there they were trying to set Donald Trump up, get him in a compromising position. Now then, back to the science area. Over in Natural News, they've got an interesting article. And normally, Natural News does a really good job. Sometimes they do get into a little bit of hype. And what they're talking about is the plastics in the ocean. And there is a lot of plastic in the ocean. And they're saying that along with pollution and endangering sea life, the other problem is it transports predators to new habitats. And they're saying the animals can travel the world's oceans for a very long time because these plastic materials don't biodegrade. Yes, that's potentially true. They can't stay out there too long or they'll starve to death. The problem is plastics aren't the only thing that does that. Any debris that falls naturally into the ocean, like branches, trees that get washed into the ocean because of flooding, they float around. Now, that's how things get carried to different parts of the planet. It's part of the natural process. And I agree that the plastics ought to be dealt with. There's no question about that. But this idea that they're responsible for predators getting into places they're not supposed to be, well, that's just not the way that nature works. Nature doesn't have walls and compartments and little locks, and you say, you tigers, you will stay here, and you will be over here. Animals are going to go wherever they think they're going to get food or mates. Now, I saw this story, and this is a definite palm to forehead moment, and I'm going to try and deal with this very, very, very gently, but this is a little bit of off. We're talking Harvard University here, and apparently they are offering, or they're hosting, a workshop on anal sex, the ins and outs of it, so to speak. And you sold your soul for a college loan for this? I mean, that is really a little bit out there. I think that's absurd in the extreme. Anyway, that Secret Service agent who got thrown in jail for stealing bitcoins, apparently they found he'd stolen even more. He's had another 2 years added to his jail sentence. And it's interesting to see the world's reaction to cryptocurrencies. from the traditional banks, the established monetary systems. But I think if there's a way that they can co-opt them, that they are going to take them over. That's how bankers think. All right, we're going to take a break for station identification. We should be back here after the break with David Joaquin, 9/11 and the World Today. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 3. And joining us on Skype now is author David Joaquin, and he's got a book out now called 9/11 and the World Today. David, thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you for having me, Michael. How are you today?
I'm doing real great. And looking back all the years since 9/11, whether or you believe the official story or whether you think 9/11 was a false flag attack to try and start a century of unending war, there is no question that the course of our nation, the course of certainly of its war policy, was shifted dramatically by 9/11. And I understand that your book is basically an examination of all the changes that have happened to our society, our culture, our mindset, our ethics and morality brought about by 9/11.
Yeah, to a point. Basically, I worked at 9/11 as a volunteer worker, so I had an inside view of what actually occurred. And the demolition is actually what I tend to go with, demolition of the buildings. And the book is about what are the commonalities that are enslaving us today as Americans and as a human population. So there's a lot of different segments of our society, whether it be medical, like you're discussing right now, legal, taxation, all the different areas of suppression for mankind are covered in the book, and who's actually conducting the suppression. Then how eventually it leads to how we can get out of that, and then how we can build a better world that's more fit for humanity rather than fit for a mental patient, basically, right?
Well, you're certainly right about that. It does seem like the inmates are in charge of the asylum right now. And it is kind of interesting as we look at all these revelations coming on out about rigged primaries and dodgy dossiers. It does almost feel like the government is starting to fragment and factionalize rather badly. And it may be that, I'm speculating here, that even the government was not really able to properly exploit 9/11, and partly that is in turn because so many people had doubts about it right when it happened, that we were getting the actual story that Osama bin Laden was behind all of this. So can you pick like one particular area where you think we've seen the most dynamic change?
I think it's in the war that the acceptance of war has become a commonplace, right? We just look at it, the slaughter of hundreds of thousands and millions of people as just another occurrence that happens during the course of events. We're being set up, and now it's exponentially increasing in randomity in rate. Where you have one example of the people in Vegas being shot down, and that obviously was an inside job because they can't even get their story straight. And then now they have the Texas shooting, and people are forgetting about Vegas to a degree. But I think one of the main things is they're just inundating us with such ferocity and such a large amount of death that it's becoming commonplace for us to just look at the news and say, oh, that's just the way it is, And in reality, we're the only ones that can change the world from a disempowering world to a world that empowers us as beings, as human beings, so that we can live a better life and have a better planet. I mean, it's great to identify, which I did in the book, identify the different factions and the different people and the different methods and machinations that are used to control the masses, and we are controlled more than most people would like to believe. But to control the masses on a daily event, on a daily occurrence, and it's just I mean, you just look at the world today, and compared to 20, 30 years ago, and you go, what happened? And what happened, like you said, is the inmates are running the nut house, right? It's like you have a small section of people, less than 0.00001% of people that are in charge, that are basically conducting the efforts of the war machine. to keep it going and to destroy this planet. But we're running out of real estate, so I don't know what we'll do after we run out of real estate to destroy through war. I mean, that's where we're heading right now.
I would definitely agree with you on that. Well, they just go back and they make war on the same real estate over and over again, which is why I'm sure the people of Europe, the ordinary people of Europe, not the governments, but the people of Europe, they are very much opposed to this obvious escalation of hostilities with Russia, because portions of the last two world wars were fought on their home turf, on their grounds, and you can still see the scars all over Europe when you're traveling around. The trenches from World War I and, bomb damage from World War II, it's still there. It's a very present memory for them. Again, the concern is that World War III is likely to have a nuclear component, which will mean that in addition with all the radiation we're dealing with from Chernobyl and Fukushima and the South Pacific open-air tests, that we could have an almost on-the-beach outcome if all the world's nuclear weapons were to get involved in this conflict. I'm going to take a second here to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. We're talking with author David Joaquin about his book, 9/11 in the World Today, which is basically an analysis of how our society has changed, what areas have been changed, the mechanisms of control that are being used to basically corral us and try and keep us in line with the war desires of the elites. I don't know how successful that they're being right now. We know that people are turning away from the corporate network news shows, and they're coming on over here to the independent media to find out what's going on. And that may be a very positive sign that, as you were saying, that we are regaining our freedom and our empowerment, certainly by starting with the idea that we're not under any obligation to believe anything the government or the corporate media tells us.
No, we are actually at an exponential rate becoming more enlightened as a people, as far as my opinion is concerned. And that is the purpose why I wrote the book. I mean, you could give this book to a novice in conspiracy areas, and after he reads the book, it would be like an expert in those areas and just know the different facets of society that are aligned against the survival of the individual. That's why it's so difficult for us even to make a living, to scratch a living out on this planet. It's very difficult when you consider overburdensome taxes and all the different regulations and things that are supposed to be getting taken care of through the Trump administration, and to a large degree I believe they are. But I mean, I don't think taxes are good in any type of environment or any kind of economy where it's against the Constitution. There's no area in the Constitution where it says you just assign an income tax, right? It's per capitation, or it's per imposts and duties, right? So those are the ways that you're supposed to be running the government. That's where the money fund comes from. But they put it down to taxes where people are paying 30-40% of their income to taxes, even more than that.
Well, that all came in at the same time as the Federal Reserve, and that, too, is unconstitutional because the Constitution vested the authority to coin money with the Congress and did not specifically say that could be delegated to a privately owned bank. So the reality is that starting about 100 years ago, our government did get hijacked by a bunch of money junkies and turned into a system that was designed and built to take the wealth out of the people whose labor produced that wealth and put it into the pockets of those people who don't labor at all.
Absolutely. And it's not even it's not even close to being fair, right? I mean, you have a taxation system, and the reason that the taxation system was set up before was so that they could take the money and pay the Federal Reserve, right? Without the IRS, there'd be no Federal Reserve, and the other way around. Without the Federal Reserve, there'd be no IRS.
That's true.
Because the money they collect the money. All the money, according to the Grace report and for taxes, goes to the actual paying of the interest of the Federal Reserve. 100%. None of it goes to what you would think would go, right? The road taxes go to building the roads. The property taxes go to building the schools and things like that, right? And there's a whole chapter in my book about taxation, 2 chapters actually. So.
And of course, a huge amount of now is being poured into these wars of conquest all over the world. And again, I think the majority of Americans are very war weary. They're tired of these wars. They're tired of seeing their kids come back from the front lines either in cheap metal boxes draped with a flag or in a wheelchair. And I think people have really had enough of this, mostly because we understand that these wars are not being fought for the reasons we're being told. We have the U.S. government lies about Saddam's nuclear weapons is a good example. We have the fact that the official reason for the U.S. being in Syria keeps flip-flopping back and forth between we're there to get ISIS and Al-Qaeda to, oh my goodness, Assad is gassing his own people. And the fact that the story keeps changing that dramatically tells you that the real agenda is being hidden from the people who are expected to pay for and fight these wars going into the future. And now we're looking at a war in Lebanon and a war in Iran, which might bring the U.S. and Russia into direct conflict.
Yeah, and I think it's all planned that way. And I think your article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, which I included in my book, Michael, because I thought it was just so well written and so informative, really nails it on the head. I mean, I believe we already are in World War III, right?
I agree.
We've been at war for the past 20 years, so it's just now a matter of, when does the nuke go off, and hopefully it never does, right?
Yeah, I agree.
We're already in World War III, and we're just going around massacring people under the idealisms of patriotism and apple pie and baseball, but there's no reason for it. I mean, it's like children are fighting, right? There's no intelligence associated with the different countries so that they can actually have a resolution. That only exists because someone doesn't want a resolution, and that's the bankers, right? The bankers want the continual war. They want the continual upset. They want the suffering of humankind.
Oh, yeah, because they make money off of it. They make money off of it. I mean, wars are the bankers' richest harvest of debt, and absolutely that's what's going to happen.
Right. Yeah, so there's just so much that we can actually improve that's not being improved. And I think that's one of the main purposes of media, right? One of the main purposes of media is to subjugate the public so they don't ask the important questions. They hear the same story over and over again for a week at a time, and they're just conditioned to repeat that. When you talk with people and you say, what's your political views, you can tell whether they watch CNN or they watch Fox News, for Pete's sakes. You can just tell what their ideology is based upon, and the programming that they're based upon by the channels that they watch.
Yes, absolutely, you can. And but again, we're seeing this great disillusionment of the American population. I mean, so many of our illusions are being destroyed right before our eyes. The idea that we had fair and honest elections, that's pretty much gone at this point. Now we're seeing that our celebrity worship was very misguided, that a lot of these people that we thought were wonderful because they were on the pictures of the covers of the tabloid, that they're really not very nice people at all. And I think we're in an era where much of the mass illusions we live under are being torn down. And I think that's actually going to be a good thing, where people are going to stop allowing themselves to be encouraged to think and believe certain ways by mass media, and they're going to start to become more analytical, more self-centered. And I don't mean that in terms of being greedy or selfish, but self-centered in terms of their consciousness and saying, I am here and the rest of that stuff is outside. Let me analyze what's going on, and from that I will decide, what I'm going to do, what I'm going to say, what I'm going to think, what I'm going to feel. Again, the polls are bearing it out that we're seeing the naivete of the American people just fading away very, very rapidly. Blind trust in government and corporate media is at an all-time low, and I think that's a very good thing.
It's actually a great thing, and there are those culture assassins from Hollywood, right? I mean, they have an opinion that no one really cares about, right? And they come on and their number one intention, if you watch Saturday Night Live, is to degrade the environment and degrade the human population, right? The whole deal with Hollywood is so that they can make this culture a horrific, gross culture, and that's what they're working for, right? They're actually assassinating the culture. When you couple that with the denigration of education, right? The people today that are being educated in the school systems probably learn 1/5 of what we learned 20, 30 years ago.
I agree.
It's incredible, and that's a cult. That's how you destroy a culture. Is you destroy the education, and that's what they're actually going for, right? The continual mind numbing of watching TV, watching the news, watching sports games, and then you have a culture that's not being educated in our historical perspective to even respect the flag, right? They have people kneeling down in a football game, which is, well, I find it to be despicable. No matter what your viewpoint is about the corporate United States, it's like there's people that have died and shed blood, veterans for this country. Whether you believe in all the propaganda for the war machine or not, but still innocent men and women have died and sacrificed beyond what we can imagine, and I find it deplorable that the education system has been systematically attacked. There's a chapter on education in the book.
Yeah,
but
well, the Common Core and everything. Well, you also destroy a society by destroying its sense of identity, its sense of self, and we've been seeing that in this country. First, it was the attack on any symbols of the Confederacy. Earlier in the show, we're talking about how they're taking one of the statues of a Confederate hero down in Washington, D.C., and they're going to replace it with an 8-foot statue of former Mayor Marion Barry, who was busted for smoking crack cocaine. And so what kind of society do you have when you're raising statues to crackheads? We're seeing all this idea that, white people are now fair game for discrimination. We're seeing that in the schools. And all this liberal, politically correct nonsense about you can choose your gender and race, and we'll just go along with that. It's an attempt to destroy our sense of self, our sense of identity, our sense of history. And again, that's how you destroy a society and make it vulnerable to outside invasion, whether it's by army or by refugee.
Right, and that's the whole destruction of culture, right? So that they're sitting there. And it's so that people think it's bad to be an American, bad to be proud of your country.
Mm-hmm.
Look, people have disagreements with the country, right? But to disrespect it and disrespect the symbols of it is not the way to correct it, right? The way to correct it is to go out and actually do something about it, not sit down and do nothing. And what they're looking to do is that they're through the media they're establishing a disempowerment activity, right, where everyone is hating each other. And all the different factions of society, right? The blacks, the whites, the reds, the yellows, the greens, anything. The rich, the poor, the different aspects of society that have going head to head and fighting each other in continual combat. And it's only a small percent. When you look at Antifa, it's what, 0.00. It's a very small percentage of the people. Yet they classify it as the left attacking the right. And it's only small 300 people attacking the right.
Well, it's all part of the...
They want to lump everybody in there so they can go for a civil war. That's where we're headed in this country right now. We're heading towards a civil war where you won't even know who's on your side and who's on the other side.
Well, that's a terrible way to run a civil war here. But again, it's basically the government is keeping us divided against each other. And they did the same thing back in the 1960s during COINTELPRO, fanning up racial tension then as well, because the last thing the government wants is for the American people to come together as an American people and say the real cause of all of our hardship, all of our hunger, all of our poverty is Wall Street and Washington, D.C. working together to drag this nation into a fascist economic dictatorship. And so one of the ways the government maintains power is by keeping us divided and fighting each other and then offering to protect us from one another in exchange for a slight increase in taxes and a small reduction in our personal freedoms.
Absolutely, and that's your job, Michael, as a radio host, is to bring everyone together, right? That's why I wrote the book, to bring people together, so we could actually sit there and intellectually analyze what's going on in the society, and how do we break down the barriers of differences and focus on our commonalities and to unite and say, okay, there's the bad guy. Let's go and fix that.
All right. Well, we're going to have to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back in a few minutes here talking with David Joaquin. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking with author David Joaquin and his book 9/11 in the World Today. And before we go any further, David, where can people get the book?
taking it on Amazon.
Okay.
Amazon. Yeah.
All right. I already put.
I'd actually like to do a promotion this week, Michael. If you want to mention the book in your shows, we can do it for the next week or two, and all the money that's made from the purchase of the book, we can donate to you and your radio stations, Republic Broadcast Network.
All right. Well, that would be wonderful, and I'll take you up on that one. And I'm in the process of posting the link to the Amazon page where the book can be purchased while we talk. Meanwhile, we've got a caller on the line, Tom in Utah. Aloha, Tom. Welcome to the show. Do you have a question for David?
Hi, Mike. David, I wanted to see if you had opened up that issue. I call it the Hillary Clinton bills that destroy the family. In 1993, Hillary authored what's called the National Child Welfare Act, and then she enhanced on that in 1997, which opened up the Pandora's box to have children removed from families and put into foster care and then disappear. I got stuck into that when I started taking on cases, and if you get a chance, look at family versus state. It's a rather humble thing, but I did not know that the Clintons, along with their friends, were involved in the destruction of the family.
Well, I mean,
I just wanted to see if...
I'm sorry?
Go ahead, David.
I just wanted to see if you touched on that in your research and in your writing.
Well, in the research, as far as missing children from the states, I know Florida had at one point over 500 children missing. And it was conjectured that it was probably being used for organ transplants and organ harvesting at that particular point. The Clintons have been criminals since way back in the Arkansas days. If anyone watched, everyone's watched Clinton Chronicles, I'd imagine, right?
Yes.
So they have no scruples whatsoever. I mean, she actually tried to take the election. She actually tried to do a coup this year, right? When the last year when she just take over the entire Democratic Party. But I was familiar with their intentions to take over the health system, to socialize and communize the health system, which is what they're doing right now, attempting to do. But I didn't know her involvement with the families, but that's a very interesting point.
Well, if you go back and you look at her, if you look at her book, It Takes a Village, I mean, that was kind of telegraphing right from the beginning that she didn't see the traditional nuclear family, father, mother, children, as the foundation of society, that she saw a more collectivist approach of all the adults and all the children working together.
Right. And
anyway, David, if you get an opportunity, go to Family versus State, call me, and I can tell you what I didn't dare publish about that relationship, including Nancy Schaefer, her, quote, suicide, right?
Yeah.
Carol Keaton-Strayhorn is another player that I was introduced to. Anyway, if you want to expand on it.
It's Family versus
Carol
State.
Yeah, Family versus State. I don't care whether you spell it out or use the VS. familiesversesstate.com or .org, and you can contact me, and I can connect you, hopefully, with Carol Keaton-Strayhorn, who's still alive. But she identified the fact that thousands of children were just disappearing in the system. You were talking about Florida.
They actually are. I've actually confirmed that from my research as well.
Well, it might... Pardon me for interrupting here, but it might not be that these children are being disappeared for organ harvesting. I mean, we keep seeing every once in a while this idea that there's an organized pedophilia network in our society. We know about the Franklin scandal that was back during the Bush White House. Now we've got Corey Feldman is out there in Hollywood, and he's finally got the LAPD looking into it there. There were allegations of systemic child sexual abuse circulating in Washington a few months back, and that may be where some of these children are being disappeared to. I mean, we're dealing with people with an immense amount of money and power.
Oh, yeah. Kathy O'Brien's book, The Transformation of America, goes over that as well.
Oh, yeah, that's another lady to talk to about this, too, Kathy O'Brien. She came and sat with me. But anyway, Nancy Schaefer curiously passed away, right?
Tom, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you.
We're going to have to let you go. We've got to take another break for commercials. Then we'll be back with David Joaquin and 9/11 and the world today. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking with author David Joaquin about his book, 9/11 and the World Today. And just in general, what are some of the other areas of our lives that you see as having been changed in the aftermath of 9/11?
Well, virtually every area of our lives has been changed because they've ratcheted up their attack against humanity, right? So every area of our lives has been changed. You look at the unsustainability of the economy, right? Right now, the stock market's at 2,400, and there's no way that's gonna last, right? So there's no way that you can have a sustainable economy based on a Federal Reserve private bank. It doesn't mathematically work out. And right now we've passed the point of no return. The collapse is evident, as was exposed during the quantitative easing 1 and 2 programs that they had, where we actually bought our own debt back, right?
Yes.
Instead of putting it onto the open market in the form of treasury bills, we were buying it back ourselves.
Nobody else was buying it.
Right, so don't look over here. There's no problems, right? But virtually every area of our life, when you go to the airport, when you whatever you want to do, I mean, it's all not so much. I mean, it's all done on a gradient level, right? They increased the suppression, they increased the suppression, they increased the suppression. So one day you wake up and you're bound hands and feet, and there's no way to turn.
Well, it's kind of like the analogy about boiling the frog slowly, which I don't know if that's real or just an urban legend, and it's certainly nothing.
Real.
It is real. Okay, you've actually done that. Poor frog.
No, I haven't done it, but it's real. It's real.
I kept waiting for Mythbusters to do that one.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to do that, but yeah, I mean, my book talks about the medical mafia. I'll just read a few chapters. Government-imposed economic slavery, the stock market misconceptions, healthcare socialism, media's hidden agenda, banker bust, government's fleecing of the people, war is the problem, courts, police, and prisons, the Constitution, the state of banking, rebuilding a broken world, religious philosophies exposed, people's world order, America's leading role in societal evolution. I mean, so the book is a very encompassing book. It's almost 600 pages, and like I said earlier, if you give it to someone that's a total newbie in the world of conspiracies, after reading the book, they'll have a very fundamental understanding of what's going on in the world today.
Well, let's go back to one of the topics you mentioned, which is the Constitution, because I think what should be of concern for everybody is that we currently have a government that is openly ignoring the Constitution, indeed seems almost contemptuous of it.
Yeah, we don't have a government anymore. We have a corporate entity that's posing as a government, right? That was changed under the Lincoln administration, where it actually the United States became a corporation so they could extend to do closet taxes to the South during the Reformation.
Okay.
After the Civil War, right? So I mean, we don't even have a government. So to say that the Constitution that they swear to uphold is the actual assets that they own. That's the Constitution that they're talking about. They're not talking about the paper, the document that you swear to uphold. They're talking about the buildings, all the assets that they have available under the United States. That's the Constitution of the United States. What makes up the United States? And the United States is a trademark copyright. It's not just the government; it's a trademark. And in the book, it actually shows under the state of Delaware where those trademarks are listed.
Well,
so
my issue here is that we are always raised in that educational system to think that the government is supposed to be complying with that piece of parchment, the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights. And I remember when I was a kid, we were told, yes, these are the rules the government plays by, and this is why, in exchange, you will allow the government to control certain aspects of your life, and you will pay them taxes and so forth and so on. But certainly if this corporate entity, which, by the way, I think is contaminated with a lot of narco-criminals, narcocracy I like to call it, if they're not playing by those rules, then why are the American people obligated to obey their demands, send their children off to these wars that this corporate board is declaring, and pay the bills? And I think if most people could be forgiven for saying that if the government isn't abiding by that contract with America, the Constitution, then we're off the hook. We're under no more moral or legal obligation to listen to anything these people are saying.
Yeah, well, Pollock versus Savannah the mayor of Savannah made it quite clear when they said that the individual has no constitutional rights because he's not a party to the Constitution. It was a Supreme Court decision, I believe. So, I mean, we don't have that, right? If you look around, they just ignore it. Bush said it was just a piece of paper, right? They're ignoring it completely. When you put in socialized medicine, first of all, when they did the Affordable Care Act, it came out as a Supreme Court decision. I forget off the top of my head what decision it was, but it said that it only applies to taxpayers. And then if you look at Chisholm versus U.S., a taxpayer and a non-taxpayer are two separate entities, right? They're two separate and distinct entities, taxpayer and a non-taxpayer. So if you have a social system like the Obamacare, it only applies to taxpayers, and if you're not a taxpayer, it doesn't apply to you, and that's why the IRS enforces it, right?
Yes.
So they use the IRS to enforce it because it applies to taxpayers. So the whole thing, if you look at the tax system, you look at any aspect of it, it's really not run by the dictates of the Constitution. The government is run for the bankers and Wall Street, like you said earlier, you know?
Yeah, the money junkies. The money junkies.
Yeah, they don't care about you. They don't care about you. You're just an ant, right? We're all just ants to them. We're of no concern.
Okay, that's certainly the way they've been behaving, you know.
Yeah, and what is of concern is, like, you know, to protect and to serve for the police, that's the municipality. That's what they're actually protecting and serving is the municipality. It's actually another court decision, right? It's not to protect and serve the people. The people are the enemy of the state, right? We know what the enemy of the state, trade with the Enemy Act. We've been declared enemies of the state. So.
Well, I do know that the police, the courts have ruled that the police are not actually under any obligation to protect individual citizens from crime. And then they turn around and say, well, you can surrender all your guns because the police will take care of the criminals. And so it's kind of hard to figure out what's really going on when you're constantly being told one thing and only to find out that something else is going on. And I can't think of a more glaring example right now than this idea that we have been raised our entire lives to think that we voters do in fact have an influence on our government through that election system. And now we're finding out, most of us knew it was going on way back, but last year most Americans have now woken up to the fact that our elections are not honest, they are very crooked, they are rigged, they're subject to all kinds of manipulation, and the corporate media isn't reporting on this because they're actually part of the problem through the Voters News Service. But we know that so far there's somebody been keeping count. Over 1,100 cases of election fraud last year. Judicial Watch just came on out and said they've confirmed at least 1.1 million illegal immigrants voted for Hillary Clinton. And so, again, I think people are waking up and realizing that we are living in a modern matrix, if you will, that we've all swallowed the blue pill, and that we've been living in this carefully crafted illusion to keep us imprisoned and useful to those who are in power.
Absolutely, and we do it ourselves, right? Federal, in the old dictionaries, when you looked in the old legal dictionaries, federal actually meant contract, and that's what we do with the federal government, right? We contract with them. We go and we sign ourselves up as slaves. That occurs from the birth certificate, from the first day we're born. When your last caller was saying, why do they have the right to disrupt families? Because they own the child, right? Through the birth certificate process, the child's been pledged to the government at that particular point. So there's a lot of clandestine agreements that are there that you're not even familiar with. And when you open a bank account, there's certain agreements that occur that make you a U.S. citizen, basically, and under the servitude of the corporation. So it's actually, the more you look, and regarding the election fraud, during the Bush administration, there was a congressional hearing. I forget the gentleman's name, but it's in my book. There's a congressional hearing of the person that actually programmed the Diebold machines, the voting machines, and he testified under oath in front of the Congress that, yes, they can be They can't be manipulated, and they can send back whatever election results you want it to say. So the the machine receiving them says Bush wins, or whoever they want wins. So
Yes.
yeah, election fraud is rampant. Election fraud is rampant. If we had a paper ballot system like before, that would be one way to ensure to a degree. At least you'd have an ability to go back and count the votes, right? But when it's electronic, there's no counting the votes. There's no nothing. There's no tally of that information.
Well, then the other part of it, of course, is this idea that, again, Judicial Watch has confirmed that last year, at least, could have been more, but at least 1.1 million illegal immigrants voted for Hillary Clinton. Now, illegal immigrants are not supposed to have a right to vote. But did you notice how hard that anytime somebody came on up and said, we've got to have voter ID to make sure that people are only voting once and that they're entitled to vote. And the Democrats were out there, oh, it's racist. You can't do that. It's racist to ask for the ID. It's going to be suppressing certain sections of the vote. Yeah, it's going to be suppressing the illegal immigrant vote, which isn't supposed to be happening. And now we find out that, in fact, actually did happen. But, I mean, look at our society. You need a license. You need an ID to drive. You need an ID to buy beer, ID to buy cigarettes, ID to buy a gun. You need an ID to go into the library and borrow a library book. But on one of the most important things we supposedly are doing for the nation, which is the elections, they're saying, no, just come on in and go ahead and vote. Vote once, vote twice. Just make sure you're voting for the right side.
Right, and if you look at the immigration video, I forget the name of it, it's in my book again. It's about, just Google immigration and gumballs. This guy does a little video.
Yeah. I remember that.
It was fascinating, right? And one of the aspects of that video was that it takes 2.1 children to sustain a society. That's the level where, after deaths and this and that, the society will stay and continue to not decline. Well, our society is at a declaration rate, right? We're declining, and one of the reasons that we need the immigrants, that we're allowing the immigrants to come in, is to hopefully legalize them to the point where we can actually create more debt for the nation, because the debt of the nation is based on the birth rate of the nation. That's what Roosevelt did in 1933, right? The New Deal.
Yes.
That no one really studied, right? But at that point, the surety for the money that's printed out of the air, out of thin air, is the American people and the labor that we're supposed to provide for the next 50 years after we're born, and that's what they're looking to do, right? So that they need to have that birth rates continue, otherwise they're gonna go to get the illegal immigrants into the country so we can monetize them, and with the birth rate that the immigrants are having, which is much higher than the average Americans, and that's not a bigoted statement, it's a factual statement. That'll change the whole complexion of our political system, where Democrats are getting more and more illegal immigrants. But I think a lot of the illegal immigrants are now starting to go Republican, because they're starting to see a better socioeconomic situation available for them, rather than having the Democratic run cities and run slums the way they have right now. So.
Well, there's another aspect to that. As you say, the indigenous American population has gone into decline, and it may be because of the economic hardship. It may be because that epicite gene has escaped into the wild, and people are being unknowingly sterilized by eating contaminated corn. But for the Federal Reserve to continue its little Ponzi scheme lending, it must always have a new population of borrowers, a larger population of borrowers to loan money to allow the creation of new money, some of which is siphoned off to pay the interest on the old money. If you have a dwindling population, then that pyramid scheme financing falls apart. So another reason for the open borders, getting the illegal immigrants in here, getting the refugees in here, is it's all going to be assumed that they're going to be getting credit cards and they're going to be borrowing money, and that'll keep that Federal Reserve Ponzi going for a little bit longer. We have a caller on the line, Andrea in Oklahoma. Welcome to the show. Do you have a question for David?
Yes, aloha, and I'm so depressed. I haven't slit my throat yet. But is there any way that you see, kind of like Gandhi, they had Britain that was had taken over their country, but yet a silver lining happened. Gandhi came up with an idea. Do you have any ideas? Can you give any positive input, please? And I will listen offline.
Yeah, well, it's in my book, but one of the basic things that we have to do is actually organize as a people, right? We actually have to set up, and I'm in the process of trying to set a site up called 911intheworldtoday.com, and we have to set up an organization of all Americans, right, of all people of the earth, because the way they have it segmented through the news with API, AP, and UPI, they give us limited amounts of information. We need to actually organize and get the people all on one page so that we can go and actually discuss with our enemies how to actually change the system. Right now, they have a lack of ideas of what to do. They don't know how to get out of the system that they're in right now. And it's a maniacal system, right? It's a system bred and conceived out of destruction and hatred. And what we need to do is to put together a group, such a large group, that we actually have the ability to demand our rights back and to demand an evolution and uplifting of society, right? We all need to do our part. Instead of slicing our throats, it's like we need to go and help. You know, read my book and be a contributor. Try and make the world a better place. That's why I wrote it. I wrote it so that we could uplift and empower the people, because the people right now, once you look at Machiavelli, divide and conquer, right? The Little Prince. If we never organize and actually point to where the actual problem is coming from, the problem is coming from us, because we're sitting here and we're not doing anything ourselves. But once we get past that point of actually the point of apathy, and we decide to do something productive, and we organize, that's the hope, and that's what they don't want us to do. They don't want us to organize as a people that are free thinking and want to find viable and human solutions to the problems we face.
Okay, David, we got to take another break for commercials here. We'll be back with the last segment of our program today after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today. We're talking with David Joaquin. And David, we've got about 4.5 minutes here, and I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot. What do you see happening for this nation going into the future?
Undisturbed by our actions. I mean, it depends on what we do, right? If we don't do anything to intervene, it's going to be just hell in a handbasket is where it's going, right?
Okay.
I mean, you look at every front, all the different areas. It's just destruction, right? I compare it, liken it to pre-Germany, pre-Adolf Hitler and the Socialist Party in Germany, 1920s, when it was degraded, debauched, just debased.
Yes.
I mean, all just drugs and sex. It's just things that are bad for society, and that's where we're going right now. I mean, we're decaying at an incredible rate as a nation, and nations and planets are fragile things, right?
Yes.
They can be destroyed. The nation's been destroyed. People, different civilizations have occurred on this planet. The history that they teach you, I don't believe. I find it to be very, very, very confusing and limited. But I think that we're headed to nothing good unless we intervene, because people are waiting for the politicians to fix the situation when the politicians have created the situation by their dishonesty and their disloyalty to the American people. So really, when you want to look into the crystal ball, you look into your own heart, look into yourself very deep and say, what am I doing? What can I do to make it better? And then do something. I heard someone say, how much time should we spend making the world a better place? And the answer is all of your time, because there's nothing else to do, right? I mean, what good is it to have $1 million if you blow up in a nuclear explosion? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter one bit, right?
Yes.
So, it all depends. When you say, look into the crystal ball and tell us what you think. Where's this nation going? Uninterrupted, unbridled, it's going to go to self-destruction. It's on a dwindling spiral of destruction, going down and down and down at a faster and faster rate. It's up to us as a people to educate ourselves, and then to go and to actually pull it out of the gutter that it's going into. And that's a sad thing to say about such a wonderful and great nation, right? But it's right now in the gutter. You couldn't imagine, if you were to say, you know, picture hell on earth, I mean, this is a pretty good picture of it, right?
Yes.
I mean, there's half the people are on drugs, half the people are on psychotropic drugs, half the people are more than half are starving to death, right? 80% of the population, 2 billion people are starving. That's a consensus that we're not doing a very good job at managing this planet. If you have 2 billion people starving to death, we're failing as a society.
And an obesity epidemic here in the United States of America, where we waste 40% of our food. You're absolutely right about that. Anyway, listen, David, thank you very much for spending time with us today. We're out of time now. We're going to have to bring the show to an end. So thank you very much. And again, his book is 9/11 in the World Today. There's a link to Amazon on my main page if you want to go ahead and buy that book. So that's it for our show today. Please stay tuned for...
Michael.
Goodbye.
Go ahead, I'm sorry. Thank you.
You're welcome. And stay tuned for John Stadmiller. He's got a lot of interesting things to share with you. Take what you have learned here at this show and at my website. Share it with everyone that you know. Remember, keep pushing Dossier Gate, Primary Gate, Uranium Gate. At some point, the corporate media is going to have to start dealing with these in an honest manner. So we'll be back tomorrow with the lovely Lady Claire. Aloha, America.